Hello Year 9 and welcome to our fourth lesson in our series looking at life stages. As always, we will start this session by doing a recap of the questions from last week. Can I also remind you that obviously look at the questions for the week that we're looking at, but now we've obviously looked at a few different things over the weeks. If you can go over and just recap your answers to the questions from week 1 and 2 as well, that would be fabulous. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to go back and just double check your answers to these, that you feel confident that you know them. As always, anything you're uncertain about, anything you want any further information about, anything you want to ask about, then please get in touch. Please email me with anything that you just want a bit more information about or anything you're certain about. Okay, so last week, first question, what gross motor skills can an infant do by the time they are 6 months old? Remember, gross motor skills is the big muscles. An infant by the time they're 6 months will be able to lift up their head and their neck muscles, which is by about 3 months. They'll also be able to roll over, which is normally by about 5 months. Question 2. What fine motor skills can they do by 6 months? They can hold a rattle for a short space of time by 3 months old and hold a toy for a longer period of time by 6 months old. Question 3. When do most infants begin walking? Remember we talked about this quite a lot last time. Most infants begin walking by 13 months. Some obviously will do that earlier, some will do that later. Remember we talked about same pattern, different rates. So it's the same pattern of development, i.e. all infants will learn to walk, but at different rates. And if you've had a chance to do your own timeline, you'll see that because you'll be able to compare yours with the ones we're talking about and going through. Question 4, by what age do most children have developed gross and fine motor skills? That's by the age of 5. And the last one, by what age do children have good control, coordination and balance? And the answer is 8 years. Well done if you've gone through those and you know those, that's brilliant. Please make sure that you're going through and recapping all of them so that you know them, so that you're happy with your knowledge. Okay, so this week we are going to be looking at language development. And as always, what you might want to do is just pause this and then go through the questions. Just familiarise yourself with them because we're going to look at the answers during today's lesson. So you might just want to pause, go through it, make sure you're happy with it, and then restart. Okay, so language development. We're going to focus on language development in infancy to begin with. Language development links to intellectual. So although when we talk about the pies, we talk about it in a holistic way, we talk about all the pies together, language development is an intellectual skill. At birth, infants' brains are already well developed and they use all of their senses to learn about the world around them. So for example, we talked earlier about the primitive brain. Remember the primitive brain, this is question 1. What is the primitive brain? It's the middle part, it's the core part of your brain, and it's what you do automatically. You don't think about it. So it says here, a baby can already communicate, so that's their language, by crying. That's the primitive brain. A baby has to cry to make sure that their needs are met, that they're heard. And that's an example of the primitive brain. Primitive brain is your automatic reflexes, so things like crying, breathing, blinking and so on. By the age of 9 months, babies start to develop their memory because remember that the brain, although it's quite developed when a baby's born, the brain carries on developing at a really rapid rate. Babies are learning all of the time and so the brain is developing very, very quickly. So by the age of 9 months, babies will start to remember where things are kept, for example. So an example of this is that if a baby in a cot has a toy and they drop that toy out of the cot, at the age of 6 months, they will think that toy's lost. They won't look for it because if they can't see it, it's not there. By the age of 9 months, if they drop it out of the cot, they'll go and look for it, because although they can't see it, they'll know it's still there somewhere. And that's an example of the brain developing. Babies learn all of the time by watching people, by listening, remembering things, and this is what helps all of their brain development. But we're focusing particularly today on language development, and obviously this is really what helps their language development. So if we have a look at this, our language skills develop right from birth. You can see right at the top there. You'll notice that this has been divided into 2 stages, a blue stage which says pre-linguistic stage, and the orange which says linguistic. Now pre-linguistic means that you can understand words even before you can say them, and that's the age between 0, so from birth, to about 13 months old. So during that stage, babies will understand many words, they'll understand what's being said to them, particularly obviously when they get older, to like closer to a year old, but they won't be able to necessarily talk themselves. So if you look at this, from 0 to 3 months, a baby will make sounds like crying, cooing, and so on. That's their way of communicating. By 6 months old, babies will copy sounds. They'll start to copy sounds, like straightforward sounds like dada, for example, mama, for example. So things that they can say quite easily. And what that does is it's developing the muscles in the mouth, and also they're starting to practice not just using their own voice, but looking at how people react to it as well. By a year old, an infant will understand around 20 words, and they will point to objects. So for example, they might know things like dog, house, flower, car, and so on. So they will know some words, and if someone says, oh, can you point to the car, they'll be able to point to their car. And by 18 months old, they will use around 15 words. So you can see it's quite rapid development. So 0 to 13 is pre-linguistic, which means they can understand words before they can say them. That's question 2 this week. Question 3 this week is, what does linguistic mean? And that is the orange bit here. And that's 13 months old plus. So by 2 years old, a child can use around 50 words. So you can see that that's moving on really quickly. And by 2.5 years old, around 200. So this development is really rapid. By the time a child is 2.5, they will start to put 2 words together. So they will start to say, for example, me house, me teddy, me car. And they will be able to name more objects. By 3 years old, simple sentences and starting to ask questions. By 4 years old, holding a more complex conversation, and from 5 years old, the speech is easily understood. So you can see from the age of 0 to 5, so in infancy and early childhood, speech is developing very rapidly, and that's because the brain is developing very rapidly. Those are questions 1, 2, and 3, and also question 4 this week. Question 4 is, how many words does an average 2-year-old know? The answer is 50. It is also question 5, which is, at what age does a child understand more complex sentences? More complex sentences means more words in the sentence, and that's age 5. You might want to just pause this. You could take a picture of this maybe, so that you've got this information, or you might want to jot this down. You might want to recap and go through it just to make sure you understand it. So, on this is similar to the last one. This goes through some of the language milestones. You'll see a little bit of overlap here. So from 0 to 6 months, they make mouth movements. So they're copying or mirroring. From 6 to 12 months, coordinating the movement of the mouth, lips, and tongue. Basically, a baby learns by copying, by mirroring, by looking at someone else and copying what they see. From 12 to 18 months, a baby will start to say things. It will be single words, but they understand a lot more than they say. You can see as this goes through how the brain is developing. So you can see that all the way through an infant, so infancy to about here, look, and then into early childhood, this is getting much more complex. So if we think about, if we look at this, by the time a child is aged between 3 and 5, they can hold conversations, they can follow simple instructions, and they will ask lots and lots of questions because they're learning words all the time. 5 years plus, they will understand a lot more and build very complex sentences. By 9 years plus, so we're going into adolescence now, and this is question 6. By the time a young person goes into adolescence, they start to understand sarcasm. They start to understand more complex language. They can also understand things like symbolism, for example. You know, some of the constructs that are used within the English language. So it gets much more complex. That's question 6, which is how does language develop more in adolescence, which is it becomes more complex, understanding of sarcasm, and understanding that not all language is literal, okay, that some language is symbolic. So for example, someone says something like it's raining cats and dogs. They're obviously not being literal. They're saying it's raining very heavily. Sometimes a child in early childhood wouldn't understand that, but by the time you get into adolescence, you'll understand the language isn't literal. Okay, so this all ties in with intellectual development. Now, infants are egocentric. Now, what that means is they see the world from their point of view, and they're learning from their point of view all the time. They're learning through all of their senses. As we said earlier, a 6-month-old won't look for a toy. By 9 months old they will, because, and this is an example of intellectual development, the brain is changing and growing all of the time, and what's happening is the neural connections in the brain are joining up. The brain is actually really incredible. It's amazing. And as the baby's brain is developing, what happens is it's all lit up inside, and all the connections and all the neurons and all the pathways, once a baby learns something, they join together, they link, and once they link, the baby will remember that particular thing. It's a rapid development. It's quite incredible. In early childhood, this obviously develops because we know language develops a lot. We know one of the reasons for that is because children start school. We know that this links in with all of our pies, because when a child starts school, this helps their physical development. We know it helps their social development. They become more independent. We also know they get to know their mind a lot more. This is called self-identity, knowing yourself, knowing your own mind. But their language development also is very rapid at this time. So this is a really good example of how a life event, an expected life event, affects all of our pies. Also, in early childhood, children are no longer egocentric. They are able to see things from other people's points of view. And they're also able to start organising their thoughts and their feelings and their emotions and manage those in a way that is much more difficult for an infant. They're beginning to work things out, normally by being very hands-on. So things like counting counters in maths, doing things in a very hands-on, practical way. Also in early childhood, there's a better understanding of concepts, so things like colour, number, size and symbols, the key concepts. So you can see that the brain development is still very, very rapid in early childhood, particularly as alongside all of the other pies as well. If you've had the opportunity to watch the Secret Life of 4 and 5-year-olds, what you'll notice on there are all of these things, that these children are at nursery, they're not at school, but you'll notice that they're asking lots of questions. They are very inquisitive. You'll see that some of them are finding it difficult to see things from other people's point of view. Some, particularly at the start, some of them are a little bit egocentric, but you can see as the program carries on, they can see things from other people's points of view. You'll also notice they start to learn things by being hands-on, and you'll notice that with things like the construction toys or making things using the Lego, the play kitchen and so on. And so they're starting to understand the world around them. If you haven't had the opportunity to watch the programme yet, please try and watch it this week, and what you can do is then tie in all of the work that we've looked at so far. So what we're doing here, or what we're starting to do, is to link the pies together, because remember that we can't just think about them in isolation, we need to link them together. And what this is a whole person or a holistic approach. So an example of this, we've looked at the example of going to school. Another example is learning to ride a bike. Now, learning to ride a bike affects all of our pies. It's physical because it uses our big muscle groups and our smaller muscles, so gross and fine motor skills. It's a cardio exercise which strengthens our heart and our organs. It's also intellectual because learning to ride a bike means that you have to coordinate, so it exercises the brain. It's also emotional because it makes you feel happy, makes you feel good about yourself. And it might also be social because you might cycle with your family or friends. So that's a good example of how all the pies are linked by doing one activity. Now, I want you to pause this now and choose one of these. Take a few minutes and just think about how one of these activities develops more than one of the pies. So we've got here a child building blocks, children playing music and singing. You could add dancing there as well if you wanted to. And children or child on the climbing frame. Okay, so choose any of those three. Pause it now. I know I say this to you each week, but if you've got a folder or a couple of sheets of paper or anywhere where you can just note things down, jot down some ideas, and once you've jotted them down, then go on to the next section. Okay. So you might want to just stop this and just to go through this. So whichever one you chose, here are pies, look, physical, intellectual, emotional and social. So if you chose building blocks, you might have written that physically, building blocks, you're using fine motor skills to pick up the blocks and place them. It's intellectual because you need to use coordination to know where to place the blocks. Also, if they're number blocks, then obviously you're learning numbers as you go. It might also be emotional because you might feel a sense of achievement, or it might help boost confidence as well. You may have, I didn't write anything down for social here, but obviously you could write that you might feel part of a group, you might build blocks with friends and so on. Climbing frame, you're using the big muscles here to climb. So you're using gross motor skills and fine motor skills holding onto the frame. Intellectual, you need to think about balance and where to put your feet and where to climb. So that's using a lot of your brain to think about it. Again, I've put a sense of achievement here. I could have added social if you're with friends or classmates and so on. And the last one, singing, playing music or dancing. If you're holding a musical instrument, then you're using the muscles in your fingers in particular, so that's fine motor skills. If you are singing, then you're using your fine motor skills as well. If you are dancing, then you're using gross motor skills, using the big muscles. Intellectually, it's language development, also understand the timing of music. Emotional, feel happy, feel content. And social, feeling part of a group. So you can see that all of these link to all of the pies, and most activities do. The key when you are doing your pieces of work is to think about how one links to another. Okay, so this week, please, as always, go through the key questions. We will go through these at the start of next week. If you have the opportunity or have the time, can you go through some of the extension activities? That would be perfect. If you need me to send you the link to the revision material, then just let me know and I will just email me and I'll email that back to you. If you haven't had a chance yet to look at the Secret Life 4 or 5 years, please do, because you can now we've covered a few lessons, you can actually look at that episode and then go back to the lessons that we've looked at and tie it all together. That'd be perfect. Okay, have a good week and I will see you next week. Bye. Bye for now.